Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Untrivial Podcast. My name is Allie Nelson. I just wanted to start today by thanking everybody who entered the giveaway on Instagram. I'm so grateful for all the likes and shares. If you are the winner, you'll receive a DM from me on the Untrivial page today when this episode airs, so Tuesday, April 30th. Thank you guys again. I definitely want to do more giveaways in future, and I really liked engaging with everyone in a different way. I am so excited for today's episode, you guys, because this is probably one of my favorites or my favorite episode I have ever recorded for the show so far. My guest is Dr. Tamara Fackrell, and she is a law partner at Fackrell McLean Law and has been mediating for over 25 years. She is a practicing attorney and also has a Ph.D. in marriage, family, and human development with a focus on marriage, divorce, and children of divorce. She was a law professor for 14 years at the Reuben Clark Law School and is also the author of over 15 books. Today, we discuss the reasons why marriages fail, how to navigate conflict in romantic partnerships, systems and processes you can put in place to improve your relationship, and so much more. I recommend taking out your phone or a notes app or a notebook with this episode. There are so many nuggets of wisdom, and she has all these really great acronyms and processes to help define things and lay things out in a really systematic way. So I would definitely recommend taking notes. I did for sure. And stick around for my solo moment at the end because I'll talk through just kind of my feelings on the episode, a couple of my own remarks. So that's at the very end of the episode after the interview portion. Tamara also manages a social media page called mindful_marriage on Instagram, where she takes all of this wisdom she learned from her time as a divorced attorney and turns it into marriage advice, marriage tips and tricks, information on how to improve your relationship, and so much more. So definitely go give her a follow. I really hope you guys enjoy this episode. And with that, let's get right into it. Tamara Fackrell, thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, I would love to start by just having you share a little bit of background about yourself and just how you got to where you are today with both being, a divorce lawyer, but also this really great marriage resource online.
Yeah. So, my undergraduate actually when I is in communication and psychology, and then I decided, you know what, I'm going to go to law school. My dad was an attorney, and so I grew up helping him in the judge's chamber. He was a judge down in Las Vegas. So I went to law school and I got into the family law portion of the law and do a lot of mediation. And mediation's really interesting in family law because you hear both sides of the story from an objective, neutral perspective. And honestly, I don't think anybody else in the world gets to really hear both sides of the story from an objective perspective. Because if you hear a friend's story, it's like you have these biases that come.
Mm-hmm.
And so you might know both of the sides of the story, but what you learn as a divorce mediator tends to be really different than maybe the story they tell to people about what happened, because sometimes people are trying to make the other person look as bad as possible inside the session and things like that. So I was a divorce attorney and mediator for about 10 years. And I just had this longing because I was learning so much. I just had this longing to help people stay together. And so I thought long and hard about what's the best way that I could meaningfully give inside of this space. And I decided to get my PhD in marriage, family, and human development. And on my dissertation, I had people at the crossroads of the divorce that were thinking about divorce, but hadn't yet divorced. And we tracked them in a longitudinal study to try to figure out what made some people move towards divorce and other people move towards the marriage. We called it the marriage wilderness. And so ever since then, I've still actually divorced people as my full-time job. And then I moonlight trying to keep people together in their marriages. So I do a lot of podcasts. I run Instagram at mindful_marriage, give marriage tips to people. And instead of a forwards approach, I kind of take more the backwards approach. Like, I've seen people do it really wrong. So, like, here's some things that you kind of can learn from it. And then I also to help maybe 3 to 5 couples a year go through a really intensive program to get to their 10 out of 10 marriage formula. And I love marriage and family. And the reason I'm so committed to the divorce space is to create peace and tranquility for kids when their parents decide to make that decision. I feel like it's a really important gift to give the overall family structure to create those peaceable ways to move forward. And I understand it doesn't always work, but to create a pathway for the family to have a really solid family structure for the kids' benefit is one reason I'm super committed to the divorce space. And then I'm committed to the marriage space because overall, if you can have a happy, healthy marriage, it benefits people, children, communities, and overall is just something, great that we ourselves can offer to ourselves and our family and our loved ones.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such an amazing story. And one thing you touched on there that I'd definitely love to ask you more about is your PhD work. So, what happened in terms of the people who moved towards marriage versus who moved towards divorce? And what do you think those reasons were?
Yeah. So we did a qualitative based study and it has a lot of depth to it. We called it the wilderness, the marriage wilderness. Like, it's just a wild space out there. And, what made people stay back in marriage were repair efforts that were successful, and the timing of repair efforts is really, really important. And so instead of a person, and a person a lot of times will decide they're going to divorce without involving their spouse in that decision, like, on the inside, in their head. And so the sooner that people start to express their dislike or the problems, the better. But the problem is a lot of people don't take change inside of marriage seriously enough until the person says, "I'm leaving you."
Mm.
And so it reminds me of just a divorce that I did, and the guy got a lot of, professional help after she decided to divorce and made a lot of great repairs. And he told me, "I didn't know the porcupine that I really was until I went and got the help that I needed from my therapist, and now it's too late." And so the timing of when you express the dissatisfaction, most people, might know there's a problem or something. But if you say a problem is like on a scale from 0 to 10, I tell people some people express it like a comma. It's like, yeah, for example, one of the biggest reasons for a divorce are addiction spaces. So, someone might say, "Hey, you have this addiction. Pornography is a popular one. Also, drugs, alcohol, gaming,
Mhm.
gambling, like anything that's addictive, kind of makes a monster also part of your marriage, right? Like,
Right.
there's like a third person monster inside your marriage,
Yeah.
and so they know that the spouse doesn't like that, but they didn't take it seriously enough, or the spouse might not have expressed it in a way, like, just so softly. Like, I knew it was a problem, but I didn't realize it was a problem that was so large that it was going to terminate our marriage. And so instead of just doing a comma or a period, I tell people, like, "Look, if this is a big deal to you, if this is a 9 or 10, express it in an exclamation point and express it early because your feelings get hardened and resentment occurs and resentment that's unchecked turns into hatred.
Right.
And it basically eats the marriage from the inside of your heart out. And so it's just a really important part of expressing things soon and then making as much repair as soon as possible. And those people that are able to, like, more frankly or genuinely forgive have more success in their marriage. Some people are running around, everybody has a best self and a worst self. And people inside at home, we tend to act the worst and be treated the best. And so sometimes we act really poorly in the home space, mainly because it's kind of a compliment I tell people. Like, when you're at the grocery store, you're not going to be, a negative self. At your workplace, you try to keep certain levels. And at home, it's like, you know what? I can cry. I can be sad. I can feel my whole range of emotions
Mhm.
inside my home space, under my blanket. Like I can, be like my true self and process feelings and all of those things. But when people get really angry and vicious inside their conflict resolution space, which is my specialty, conflict resolution, then and you have an open heart in marriage, it's like it gets stabbed. Your hearts get stabbed when people are name call and do things that are really, really hurtful inside of the marriage space. And so when you can frankly forgive things and like move along, that's great. But people, what we found in the study, people that are viewing their spouse as their worst self all the time, then they just don't give them a chance for repair too. So it's doing things better and, forgiving as quickly as possible. And John Gottman says that great couples aren't too far from the good ones, but they just repair more quickly and get on to moving on with life. And so the ability to repair and leave things in the past is something that's really important part of good marriage.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's so true. I think, your home, your space, your family, you feel the most safe. And unfortunately,
Mhm.
that opens you up to the best of you and the worst of you too. Um, you brought something up there too about, people maybe not bringing it up early enough or someone being maybe even blindsided by the fact that it's come to a divorce because it didn't feel like that exclamation point. And something I've heard a lot is, you know, for this example, let's say the woman brings up an issue gently and it's kind of again and again and again. And then, by the 20th time that she's frustrated by this issue, the husband may not realize where she's at, but she's kind of at the point where she's done. And it's only then that he's realizing it's an issue at all. Like it didn't even come up. And do you see that a lot?
A lot, and it's really sad in some of the divorce offices, it's like, "Well, why are you getting divorced?" And the guy said to me one time, "I can tell you in 3 words, Tamara." Like, "Well, what is it?" He's like, "I don't know." And so
Wow.
it's, I and it kind of goes with John Gottman's stonewalling. When people get into the space and stonewall, meaning they don't communicate, they just shut off, shut down, and so, yeah, it can be a really big problem. I mean, other cases, of course, know, that there's big problems and they're gonna divorce, but, just the communication of issues as they go along, and, I would tell people, don't treat an 8 like a 3 and
Mhm.
vice versa. Don't treat a 3 like an 8. Like, people also on the other end that treat everything like a really big deal, that also can be damaging to the marriage. And so using your scale from 0 to 10, like I teach people, and then thinking, okay, well, this is what number to me. And so how am I going to handle it, giving that? But assessing it first, some of the couples that I've worked with to try to keep their marriage together, it's like, okay, you guys had a huge blow up on something, just a hypothetical. I'm like, well, what was it about? And they're like, I can't really remember what it was about. And that's kind of what John Gottman says as well. The number one thing that people fight about is, it's nothing.
Oh, wow.
What he says is it's basically, the remote or the socks on the floor.
Right.
Basically, the fighting is about the not being mindful inside of how you're solving conflict with the person that you love the most. And so instead of them like stopping and thinking like, okay, how important is this small deal to me? Oh, it's not that important. Well, maybe I should just avoid it. Maybe I shouldn't bring it up at all. Maybe I should just go to bed early tonight because I'm a grouch or, whatever it is. But just keeping things, it's not great to overemphasize things, but underemphasizing things also can be a big issue inside of marriage spaces, that sacred space, because, your friend doesn't live with you, doesn't sleep with you, doesn't share every meal with you. I mean, think about how many encounters a married couple has
Right.
together, in a 1-month period. And then compare that to like even maybe your best friend. Well, it's maybe like 10 to like 10,000 encounters. So you can imagine with so many encounters and sharing space and
Mhm.
sharing chores and sharing money. When you really look at the percentages, it's probably pretty low on how many things you're disagreeing on, but it's just that you're together
Yeah, the
so much
volume.
when you compare it to how your friends are or your work people, and you don't have to share with your work people your bedroom. And there's all of these things. And so they're not exposed to all of your habits and the things that you do. And so it's a sacred space inside of marriage. And so people need to really think about, when they bring up conflict, how they bring it up and when to bring it up, when not to bring it up, and then what techniques you use, which is my specialty, in moving forward with how you resolve problems that come along.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about the best way to bring up conflict and at least using that scale to understand, okay, I'm at an 8 actually with this. If you're the partner on the receiving end of, hey, this is an 8, what do you do? How do you aim to repair that?
Okay. So there's a couple different methods. So let's just go over a few. So the first would be to what I call logicize. So I made up that word, by the way. So you're not going to find it. But logicize is where you, in your mind first, you do the thought work and you figure out what the solution is. And then you express it in 2 sentences or less. So you just, you say to the person, when to your spouse, like, hey, when we're upset and have a tiff, I know you need your space, but I need to feel loved. So if you could come back within 30 minutes and cuddle me, you don't have to say anything.
Right.
You come up with the solution. Now let's contrast that to saying, when we had this fight the other night, it really upset me and I felt hurt and you left. Like, there's no remedy inside of that. Another thing you could do is, look, I want to let you know on a scale from 0 to 10, the problem with your alcoholism, or a lot of times it's using prescription drugs in the wrong way, is now a 9 to me. And if you don't get treatment for it, I might leave this marriage.
Mhm.
That's how you express it. Like, you don't go into like, let's have a 2-hour dialogue on my big issue. You figure out how to solve that issue and you express the solution. And they might say, no, I don't want to do this or that. And then you can negotiate. Another thing that we do for like the 4 to 7 problems is called the ABCDE method. So first is like ask and actively listen to figure out. Stephen Covey says, seek first to understand, then be understood. So it's the idea that you really understand what the other party's saying and you understand for yourself where you're at and you can express it in a way. So you have a communication phase and then you move to B, which is brainstorming options or solution sets. And then you move to C, which is choosing an option. And then you move to D, which is doing the option. And then the good to great marriages do the E, which is after we've done it, we sit down in our weekly discussion, our weekly meeting, and we say, hey, how did it go? What would we do differently next time it comes about? And you do that examining. Jennifer Moon did a study on experts inside the field, and she found that the one thing that distinguishes them from other people in their field was their ability to self-examine what's going on and to make change bases from their own, looking at their own work.
Mm.
And people that look at their own marriage work, how you solve conflict, how your day-to-day tasks, what I call the duds, like how those are going, and just working through these things and examining your marriage and your family and yourself and where you're at, you're going to have the most successful marriage. Another attorney and I were both mediators. We were sitting at a conference one day and we're like, what is it that makes good marriage? Like, what is it? And we sat there and we're like, you know what it is having two whole people, two people that like know who they are, that take responsibility for their actions, have their mental health in check, don't have addictions, are loyal, are virtuous, like those things that need for marriage, but you're whole. You don't need to depend on another person to make you whole. And so two whole people make a really great partnership. And for the most part, like when I'm divorcing, we kind of say sometimes attorneys say, twos don't marry tens. And so like you get two people that are twos together and they've got all of these problems. They never learned how to solve problems growing up. They only learned fight and flight. They never
Mhm.
learned how to move into fair. And, they might have addictions and all vices and all these problems and, the marriages don't work out. And so it's just it's just, taking responsibility and trying to be your best self
Mhm.
as you move along. So the question is your home worst self, making the best version of your worst self in marriage is something that's really, really important.
Right. And I like that kind of ownership over, your yourself and how you show up. And even if you do have any issues, everyone has issues, but it's like, how are you managing that? How are you taking control? How are you improving that for your spouse or those around you and your kids? So that makes a lot of sense to me. You brought something up there that I want to talk to you about because it sounds like when we were using that example of, this is a 9 for me. And if this doesn't change, I'm going to leave the marriage or I'm thinking about leaving the marriage. And that's kind of in the world of ultimatum. And I didn't know what your thoughts were on ultimatums. Is that something, I guess it would be something when it comes to divorce as like the final straw? Is that typically how it's used?
Yeah, and I think that it's just saying like we've got to do something.
Mhm.
One couple that I divorced, the wife said, I asked him, I said, "Hey, we need to go to counseling." And he's like, "We don't need counseling." And then like 3 weeks later, she decided to divorce him. And he's like, "Wait, what?" And so again, um, I don't look at it as an ultimatum. I think that we're exploring options that my dissatisfaction of marriage is high, and I'm trying to express it as soon as possible so we can get some remedy bases. The problem that comes inside of marriage and divorce is just and that's probably why some people don't express it early. Is they're like, "You know what? Like I want to try to make it work, but I'm not letting him know we're trying to be working on our
Right.
marriage."
Right.
But that's not really fair, is it? It's
No.
like giving somebody a test without letting them know they're being tested,
Mhm.
which actually in my younger years, I used to do to my husband all the time. I'm like, "If he really loves me, he will, like, turn around right now and say, 'I love you.'" Like, he was failing these tests all the time. So, I just don't think it's fair if you're in a self-examination space where you're like, "Wow, I've got a lot of dissatisfaction in marriage." You should express it. You should get counseling. I tell people try everything. Fight really hard for your marriage. Try everything possible. And I tell people try 6 months. Don't say like, "Hey," a lot of people will only go to counseling after they've already made the mental decision to divorce. And that's not really fair because they're not there to solve the marriage problems. They're there to say they tried, even
Mm.
though in their mind, they've already made the decision, "Hey, I'm divorcing."
Right.
And so, like, early intervention and what we found out in the qualitative study that early intervention is really, really important. And so it doesn't seem that fair to be able to say, "Hey, like, I'm at the point where we're not I'm not gonna do this anymore." And then, you don't let your spouse know. So I wouldn't think of it more like an ultimatum. I think that what I'm thinking of more is, just a space that, hey, we've got to do marriage repair. And you need to know that we're actually in this phase.
Right.
Because if you don't let your spouse know that you're in the phase of marriage repair, then they don't take it. They don't make the same effort.
Right. That's such a fair point. What are you I know we talked about addictions coming up a lot and what you see. Are there any other main issues that you're seeing with couples when they're coming to divorce?
Yeah, I actually did my own tiny little study on it. Not really, but, like, what I did is I just tracked people divorcing, and, like, I just wrote down, like, "Hey, why are they divorcing? And I found I made an acronym because I'm like crazy about acronyms when I teach people. I made an acronym that it's called AAA half. And so the first is addiction, which we've already talked about.
Mhm.
And then the second one is adultery.
Mm.
People that have adultery inside their marriage, like that is a marriage breaker.
Yeah.
And inside that also I found open marriage, when they do open marriage dialogue, and even when they're like, no, we agree that, it's not part of our marriage. For the most part, it doesn't tend to work out that great.
Mm.
So, adultery, the next one we've talked about as well. That's anger management and immaturity and conflict resolution. Then the next one is health or mental health issues. And then the A is avoidance or lack of communication. And Smart Marriages said that avoidance is one of the number one indicators for divorce. And then L is a lack of regular sexual intimacy. And so that tends to be a really big one as well. And then F is faith crisis or faith differences. And then the last F is finances. And those reasons will grab about 85 to 90% of why people divorce.
Wow. That's really insightful, though, because I think I mean, obviously things change over the course of the marriage, but it'd be really valuable to talk with your partner kind of early on or before you marry and make sure you're aligned on your values and your beliefs and kind of doing a check on all of those things. If you're saying, if we get this right, 90% of why people divorce could be avoided for us. Like that's such
Yeah.
valuable
And
insight.
so yeah, and like it's just like, again, I'm about that reverse engineer. So I'm gonna tell
Mhm.
you why people divorce. And then it's like, okay, well, like for example, faith is something of it. And like, for example, some people are really religious and will only marry inside of their own faith base.
Mhm.
And so then instead of making faith like a religious or a spiritual commitment, I encourage couples where, let's just say, you like faith is so important, you wouldn't marry outside of your faith. Then I encourage couples to say, hey, look, faith is a marriage commitment for us. Like we agree together that we're going to pray regularly and attend our services regardless of our religion or our spirituality, because it's so important to the basis of why we've found each other. Because literally some people say, look, even if you're the exact same person, if we didn't share a faith, I wouldn't marry you because my faith is that important. And so later in the marriage, when people leave faiths where that was the basis of their marriage, it causes a breach to
Right.
occur. And so it's like, so I encourage couples to make faith a marital commitment, not just a religious or spiritual commitment. So that's, one thing. And I have like what I teach people, if a friend comes to you and is in marital distress, I teach people to be marriage ambassadors through, of course, another acronym, but it's the PAID acronym. And so it's like, just start with the basics. So P is prayer. And that is just, I tell couples to pray for their marriage together every day, like out loud. Like, do you actually pray for your marriage? Do you actually ask God for assistance in marriage? And I know not everybody's religious. So people might also do meditative spaces or something,
Or like a
to have
gratitude
like
practice kind of thing.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so, however you would want to adapt that, a gratitude practice or whatever it is, that is something that can be important. And then A is an act every day, a mindful act. Like I'm actually going to do something mindfully for my marriage today. It might be so simple as a flirty text. It might be that you're going to make your spouse's favorite dinner. It might be that you planned a date. It might be, but that you're just doing one thing, not in auto cruise control robot mode, but like what's my one thing I'm going to do today?
Mhm.
And if if you wanted to go from good to great, which I'm always talking about the good to great, then you would ask your spouse the night before, "Hey babe, what could I do for you tomorrow that might be meaningful?" It's like it's one sentence. So you could like, "Well, what should I do?" I'm like, well, I have an idea. Like, why don't you just ask your spouse? And sometimes it's just the smallest little things that really can make a big difference. And then the I is regular sexual intimacy inside of marriage. And that's something that I'm big on because when you divorce, almost always one of the first things to go is like a regular intimate relationship. And so it's a predictor of divorce. And so one thing on regular sexual intimacy is the studies show that average is 1.5 times a week. And I always say nobody likes a point 0.5. So if you can round up to 2, but I tell people like what's the right amount for you and your spouse? Well, only you and your spouse know that.
Right.
And you guys should figure that out. But having really healthy sexual intimacy, and of course, I have another acronym for that. There's different types of intimacy, but I'm talking about sexual intimacy here, not emotional,
Right.
not physical. Like they're different. And so, but keeping it regular. If people can't agree, I tell them, well, stick with 2 if you can't agree, or go get a sexual therapist involved because great intimacy in your marriage can really build and horrible intimacy can really take away from your marriage. So that's something that really needs to be figured out. And if the 2 of you can't figure it out on alone, and I've got a lot of friends that are sex therapists and they're like, they tell me, I mean, they can guide people through that process. So getting a lot of good health inside of that space is really important in marriage. And then the D is there's 2 of them. One, I think, is another good to great, which is couples that have a weekly discussion.
Right.
So they sit down once a week, and I have the RAP formula where basically you sit down and you think about what are our responsibilities for the week? Like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, like this next week, what's going on? Because people have a lot of conflict over expectations that are not communicated, miscommunicated, or changed without notice. So sharing responsibilities can be really, really important. And then the A is just an appreciation and kind of that gratitude. Hey, this last week, let me give you feedback. The thing I loved that you did the most is, and then you tell your spouse, like, this is the number one thing that I love that you did the most. For my husband this week, we hosted a big Christmas sing-along party at my house, and he helped me so much. We had to set up all the chairs, and in our weekly meeting, I'm like, "Thank you so much for, all that you did for setting that up." Um, and then and then also you're gonna be planning, like, "Hey, what's our date this week?" I always say that a date that's planned 24 hours in advance is 10 times better than 24 minutes in
Yeah.
advance. So, but in the weekly planning, it's like who's gonna be doing it and kind of hold yourself accountable, but having that one-on-one time, especially if you have kids, making sure that your marriage is a separate entity and having that time where it's one-on-one with one another in the marriage. And then P is problem solving. Just taking one problem solving item and just running through the A, B, C, D, E and coming up with a solution. And if you don't need the A, B, C, D, E, you can just do a solve solution where it's just like, problem solve, PS, I call it the PS method. Here's the problem. How do we solve it? We don't really need to talk about it. And so all of that can be done in a weekly discussion. And then the last D is just the date night and just making sure that you're spending quality time together one-on-one. And that's where when you get into the studies, and I also did a lot of study on the balance between work and marriage and kids and marriage. So it can kind of be a tricky tightrope,
Mhm.
because a lot of people wouldn't be late for work, but they're commonly late for coming home from work or their dinner appointment with their spouse. And little tiny kids just take so much effort. And even sometimes I talk to parents about, not having the kids start sleeping with you in your bed at the beginning of the night. I understand that sometimes little kids might get up in the night, but like creating that sacred, separate space for marriage to be able to flourish, and so all of those things can be really important.
Yeah.
So the PAID acronym, you just tell your friend, like, "How are you doing on these things?" And just kinda, like, focus on the basics.
Right.
And that's kind of how I teach people to be an ambassador for marriage, just teach those very simple concepts.
One thing that came to mind there when you were speaking, um, that I think maybe people would have questions around when we're thinking about the intimacy side, and say you're at a place in your marriage where, maybe there's a bit of friction. I know that a lot of women, need to see some like emotional intimacy or some support before they feel ready to go into that sexual intimacy space. So, knowing how important it is, I just think it's a helpful reminder that it takes those other things to even lay the foundation for that to happen, I think, for a lot of women. Do you kind of share that in your discussions with couples too?
Yeah, for sure. We have the pies method. And so it's physical intimacy, which is any type of like courting, touching you might have or touching that's not sexual. And then we have intellectual intimacy and we have emotional intimacy and we have sexual intimacy. So all of those can be a part of it. But what I don't recommend is someone using sexual intimacy as a weapon because basically, because one thing that's just really interesting is that you can get intellectual intimacy from friends and emotional connection and intimacy, like, from other spaces. But inside of marriage, like, there's really only one space to get the sexual intimacy. And so even though you can dive into the other, parts, other places, sexual intimacy can only really be met in marriage. And so when, a person's like, "Well, I don't want it for a very long period of time," and it 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 starts to cause problems in the marriage. And the thing that's so amazing about sexual intimacy is the fact that you share oxytocin, you're sharing all of these chemicals. So, it's kind of like the cart and the horse,
Mhm.
the chicken and the egg. It's like, we're not getting along, so I don't wanna participate in sexual intimacy, but it's like maybe doing that would help us have the connection. So, I think that you just wanna find the right balance for you, but again, my big thing to people is try to solve your problems within a 24-hour period. And, for myself, like, I encourage people, if your spouse wants intimacy, try to meet that need all the time if you can. And let's just say you can't, like you said, like right now I'm just not connected. Then I tell people within a 24-hour period, find that repair and then you initiate. If they tried to initiate and you're like, you know what, I just can't right now. I'm too tired or I just am not in the headspace there. But my big thing is, people that are saying, "Oh, well, I've been upset for a week and 2 weeks and 3 weeks," like, it's just not a healthy space.
Right.
So what I'm encouraging couples to do is maybe you're like, "Hey, 24 hours isn't long enough for me, Tamara." It's like, "Okay, like, then do 48 or whatever it is." But, like, let's not get into 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12. That's the road to divorce. The road to divorce is fighting big, not repairing, cutting off sexual intimacy, you know, getting into the resentment space, like, I see that every day.
Right.
So that's the road to divorce. So
Right.
if and so you have to kind of take responsibility if you're not feeling connected with your partner to have repair and you need to make those repair items. Or sometimes people just want to self-soothe and do it on their own too. But you need to do it within a reasonable time period. That's my perspective. People that let problems sit too long, end up in
Yeah.
divorce.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking more broadly, I guess, how do you feel about marriage today? I think the divorce rates have gone a little bit lower since they were 50. I think they're around 40 now, but there's also a lot of people choosing to not get married overall. What are your thoughts on kind of the broader trends?
Um, I mean, the studies are quite clear that kids do better in a marriage setting than having cohabitating parents. So when you talk about like the child perspective, and I'm very child focused, just so
Right.
you know, like my whole life is dedicated to kids. So it's the best thing you can do for children to create that stability that comes. Also, there's legal protections inside of
Mm,
marriage that aren't also there for cohabitating people. So that's like another thing to think about. But for me, like the exciting stuff is there's some research by Eli Finkel that comes out of Northwestern University, and he says This is a quote. Americans today have elevated their expectations of marriage and can, in fact, achieve an unprecedentedly high level of marital quality if they invest a lot of effort in it. And so what his research shows in his book is that marriages today are actually the best of all time that they've ever been in the
Really?
history of the world.
Oh, that's
And
amazing.
it also shows, like, a gap that they're the worst too. So there's,
Oh.
like, this what they call the great divide.
I got excited too early.
Yeah, there's the great divide of people.
Mm,
But the reason, like, imagine, Allie, you telling your great-great-great-grandmother, like, "Hey, what I'm gonna do in my life is have a podcast and be this great professional, like, I'm gonna do all these things." She'd be like, "What?" One of the reasons that Eli Finkel's marriage, let's focus on the top part of it, is because people are willing and able together to what he calls self-actualization. He actually uses Maslow's model and pulls it through marriage. And self-actualization is that ability to have your dreams met and you meet them together with your spouse. And we have access at our fingertips to information, to travel, to so much access to things and things that we can do that our great, ancestors couldn't do. And so that ability allows us to have those resources poured inside of our marriage spaces. And also because a lot of times women are able to self-actualize in a different way than it, 3 or 400 years ago too. And so it just brings the level, up. And so marriages today, a lot of them are just doing amazing.
yeah, I think we also there's way less stigma, I think, around even just therapy, mental health, wellness. There's so many books and resources and the internet full of amazing marriage experts and counselors. It's like you have all of this knowledge and information about how to make it the best you can and make your well-being the best you can, that yeah, I think it'd be silly not to capitalize on it. But to think about the flip side where you're also saying it's also the worst. Why is that happening?
Mainly because people's level of commitment in marriage has changed significantly.
Mm,
Because it used to be that a long time ago, prior to 1960s and before, marriage was actually a legal contract that you were bound by and you could not get out of.
right.
So, and then there was, like, a few exceptions. Well, you can get out of it for habitual drunkenness, adultery, like a few items.
Mhm.
And then we moved to basically the no fault divorce laws. And I've done so much study on this, and so it shifted people. So now it's like people don't stay in marriage. It's like, you know what? I'm not happy at the moment. Like, I'm leaving. And so your ability to leave marriage is so much greater. And what I found in my studies, a lot of people consider leaving marriage when something large happens in their life, like even like a death of a parent
Mhm.
or some major something happens and it causes this tumult in not in their personal life too. But it's like it used to be that, like, hey, we're working through things, like, and one of the number one things that keep people together is their commitment level. That and one study by Linda Waite is really, really interesting because she took people that were unhappy and happy in marriage. She did a study, and then she followed the unhappy people. And about half of those in the 5-year study ended up divorcing. But she found that the people that divorced, didn't end up being more happy than when they were married. They were still unhappy and divorced.
Oh.
And so when people say, like, I'm divorcing because I want to be happy, the studies are showing that's not going to really add to your happiness. And in fact, the people that were tracked and stayed married, the vast majority of them became happy again through that net. And a lot of my research showed marriage isn't just about two people. It's also about like the community of you friends that you have and your neighborhood and having finances together, because two people having finances together is a lot more than cutting the blanket in half that we have to do in our divorces. So and the resource of extended family and children and villages, like it's so much bigger than just two people.
Right.
It's way, way, way bigger than that. And so those are some things just to think about, that marriage, what is found to like over time in marriage, the happiness can repair. But a lot of people that are unhappy and divorced, they stay unhappy.
Oh, that's unfortunate. The other larger trend, I guess, is that nearly, I think it's 70% of marriage divorces are initiated by women.
Yeah, it's 67%.
Wow. So what's driving that, or why do you think women are the ones who keep going towards, okay, I'm done?
I think that women in the research are known as the relationship keepers.
Hmm.
And John Gottman's research shows that the vast majority of problem solving in marriage is brought up by the woman. And so I think that relational dissatisfaction is higher in people that are emotion based versus logic based. People that are higher in logic tend to have more simple relationship needs, if
Mm,
that makes sense. People with emotional needs being met, they're more complicated and they're shifting a lot and
right.
there's not an easy stream. And then if you combine that with an inability to communicate effectively, with a constant shift and change of needs occurring, that, there's more dissatisfaction. And again, there's a great divide in the happiness literature. Women are more happy and less happy in these two groups, and men are more like steady happy. And so I think that a lot more women dip their happiness down, way down low. Like the studies show that. And so I think that the way that's managed just causes a lot more relational dissatisfaction. And so they tend uh, to file more often for a more variety of reasons.
Yeah. Um, so in terms of how maybe listeners or we can, try and create a marriage that doesn't end in divorce, do you think a large part of it, outside of repair in marriage, but before we even get there, is it about choosing the right partner? And if so, what do you think people need to be aligned on to enter a marriage that you think will be more successful?
Yeah, I think choosing a partner is the most important thing.
Yeah.
And I've had, some of my kids are getting older now and, they're in the space of choosing their partner. And, a lot of times we just have a lot of candid conversations about red flags that come up, things because you're not going to marry a perfect person.
Hmm.
Like there's going to be some strikes and there's going to be some moving forwards. But, you've got to decide. And I encourage people like make a list and figure out what your non-negotiables are and kind of move forward. But, when you look at the AAA half on what people divorce for, you got to think those items through. Like if you're faith-based, how important is that to you? Addictions, does the person that you're trying to partner with have serious addictions? And then, sometimes people, like for my own kids, because I'm a communication expert, there's 6 different styles of communication. And bottom line is how you solve conflict is like number 3 on breaking up your marriage. Like how you solve conflict can break up your marriage for no good reason. The
Mm,
other ones are kind of good reasons.
right.
But how you solve conflict isn't really that great of a reason. And so there's certain communication styles that work better together and are more symbiotic. So I always like am assessing communication styles and saying, "Hey, like how do these two styles match?" And I'm like, "It's not a match." And So, and me and my husband actually aren't a match, which is the reason that I got into all this communication style stuff, because I'm like, I'm going to figure this out. And so we've been able to bridge it. So you absolutely can bridge differences in your communication styles, but it's easier not to. It's easier to marry someone that kind of matches where your style's at.
Mhm.
So that's another big thing. And I would say this, your one village person, let's just say like your mom's best friend, let's just take her, or your aunt. Like, you go to them and you say to them, "Auntie, like, honestly, do you think this person is a good match for me? Like, don't sugarcoat it. I'm making a life decision here. I need you to tell me the pros and cons of this." And I've done this with a lot of people. And we write the pro list and we write the con list, and I'll say, "Hey, you know what? There's this many red flags, and for the most part, I'm not gonna overall encourage you to continue the relationship with this person." Or, "Hey, look, we've got a really good fit here."
Right.
And so, like, as a friend, how you can just, maybe you had a friend growing up and they were with someone and they just weren't a good match for each other.
Mhm.
You know, I think you just, and I'm really open with people. And I'm just saying, you're asking my opinion, and my opinion is that it's not a good match. And here's the reasons why. And love is blind, and limerence is, which is like that Cupid's arrow, tends to wear off within 18 months of marriage. And then one day you just wake up and you're with the person, and all the pros and cons of them is with you. And we're not perfect people. So there's always, things that we're working through. But, I think that you just have to kind of make wise decisions. And sometimes the hardest thing you can do would be like, "Hey, we're dating and we're fighting a lot, or we're not, matched in certain ways that are really important to me." The best thing you can do for them and yourself is to let them go and let them find someone that matches them better. That's a gift that you give someone. And so it's a hard gift, and that's probably the highest love that some people have to do sometimes, is to be able to, let someone go when you're, 5 most important people in your life, and you tell them, like, "You tell me candidly, don't hide anything. Let's have a frank discussion. Don't say things just to be nice."
Mhm.
And if 3 of your most important people are like, "Allie, like, this is a good fit for you." Then it's like, okay, right? That's making sense. And so, but I wouldn't compromise on things that are 10 out of 10 to you. And so, there's some things we definitely compromise on, and then there's other things that we don't compromise on. And so the choice of marriage is super important. And the divorce statistics show, like, if people have children after they're married instead of before, that's one factor. If people make more than, I think it's like $80,000 in a year in combined income. If people have graduated from high school, then graduated from college. There's all these factors that can get, like, the divorce rate down to like 25%. Um, and so there's certain things that, you might be want to be working towards. And, and then I think another really, really big thing is fighting fair. And so just kind of looking um, at the conflict resolution space as a business space. Like, if you wouldn't do it in the business space, solve problems in your marriage, like, just like a business. So developing, like, the business part of your relationship.
Mhm.
And a lot of people don't fight when they're dating and engaged, but then when you live with someone 24 hours, you kind of fight different. But just getting a method that's workable. I think all of those things are really, really important.
Yeah. So many things you mentioned there. I think the one I wanna go back to is, oh, how scary it would be to ask the closest people in your life what they think about your partner and, like, if they're a right fit, especially if you're someone who's like, "I don't know," or you're on the fence. That would be so hard, and I feel like it would take someone who's ready to hear it to even ask those questions or have that conversation
Mhm.
if they think the answer could be, "You know what? I don't know if this is the right fit for you." That would be so tough, but I think so important. And I think I like how you mentioned, giving that opinion if you're asked, because I think a lot of people will make a decision and some people won't agree. And your parents might say something, they might not. They might be like, "That's your decision to make."
Yeah.
So it kinda depends on the level of advice they want to insert, but I like the idea of being the person in the relationship to be seeking out that information from the people you care most about.
Yeah. And I mean, and remember that person isn't making a decision for you.
Mhm.
That person is just like expressing pros and cons and
Right.
concerns,
Yeah.
you know? And so ultimately, regardless of what the people that have come to me choose, like I support them in their decision, but if they want a candid opinion, I'm willing to give it to them. And it's a gift that you give people because I think what happens is some people say, well, if I tell them I don't like the person and then they marry, then all of a sudden,
Right.
there's going to be a problem. Right. And so that's why people don't speak up. But what if that resulted in a divorce and children being born that have to go back and forth? Wouldn't it have been a nicer gift to express a few things like, and I think you express things early, like for myself, at least with my own kids, if they're dating someone early that I just don't think is a good fit or has a lot of red flags, I don't like wait until they're in the really serious phase to bring that up.
Mhm.
Like, as a gift to them, I bring it up early.
Yeah. It doesn't make them wanna, like, double down and run away with them.
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't for my kids, but I've got a really good, healthy relationship with them,
That's so great.
and so and they are, like, inquiring just because I'm a relationship specialist, but I mean, not everybody's mom's a relationship specialist, and my
No, that's such a good resource to have in a mom, like, "Hey,
yeah,
what do you think?"
and even, like, they're bringing their friends over, they'll come over, do a little meeting with
Oh,
me, like,
yeah.
"How are these guys at matching?" and all of these things, so I understand I'm in a unique position, but
That'd be so
I
fun.
do think that everybody has that resource, and maybe not your mom, maybe not your sister, but, like, one person out. Like, that's why I'm saying, like, an aunt or your mom's best friend or one person out, somebody
Yeah.
that you really, really trust. And, getting candid feedback, I think, from an objective perspective can be really important.
Mhm, absolutely. And then talking about treating your marriage like a business, I've
Mhm.
heard something similar on it was on the internet somewhere. Someone was talking about, like, the life dinner where it's scheduled dinner and you similar to your acronym, you have these very specific things that you move through. I think some people might think that's too corporate, but other people think, "No, I need that structure and I need to make sure I'm approaching everything in my marriage the right way." And I think you can make it as formal or informal as you want, but to make sure that you're checking in with each other, I think is the main key there, right?
Yeah, and it's just like I mean, you have to ask yourself, like, how does your business space solve a problem?
Mm.
Like, if there's a problem between 2 coworkers, how is it resolved?
Yeah, you don't scream at each other, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, you're not gonna name call, you're not gonna scream, you're not even gonna, like, address it the moment you have the heated emotions.
Mhm.
And so, like, being just really mindful about how you approach the conflict space inside your marriage and is just essential. And so I have the romance journals that inside of it, it just has like, look, just talk through it and you can do the ABCDE and just work through it in a problem solve method. And one thing that I tell people is never ever solve a problem with your spouse unless you have a pencil in your hand. And it's like, well,
Hmm.
why? But you should see the videos I see of people running around screaming and yelling at each other. Like, if you had a pencil in your hand, that means that you've done something to be out of the emotion space, to grab a pencil, sit down, get a piece of paper. I'm going to listen. I'm going to take notes, just like you would in a business meeting.
Right.
And so that's like my number one thing is don't solve a problem with your spouse unless you have a pencil in your hand. I mean, it can be a pen or it's for me, even a crayon. But the idea is that we're gonna take a really business-like approach in the way that we solve things. And then also, I didn't mention the share method, which is basically when the problem solving is just, "I just need you to listen to me. I don't want a solution, I just wanna be heard and understood."
Mhm.
And so then you summarize what the person has said and you hear the one thing I tell people is like be scanning for emotion-based words, hear them and repeat them back. You're frustrated, you're excited, whatever it is. And at the end, repeat those emotion words back to people. and, do acts of caring. And at the end, all they need you to do is say, oh, I love you, and summarize you. And there's no solution. Like, that is the solution. So if you're in the share method or the A, just the A, and you don't need a solution, you need to let your spouse know, like, am I solving or listening? Are we in share or solve? And I just tell, oh, no, I'm in share. I don't need a solution. Oh, well, that's good to know. Like, you need to know what process we're engaging in. Are we doing problem solve where we're just solving? Are we doing the whole thing, which is A, B, C, D, E? Are we doing just the share, which is just the communication phase?
Right.
So, if you could let your spouse know which one you're in, that's helpful. If you don't know which one, and sometimes you might be, hey, we're in the share mode, and then at the end, you're like, actually, I might need some solutions. You could flip over to the A, B, C, D, E. So, but letting your spouse know where you're at and what mode you're in can be really, really helpful. And then just regular good communication. The people that divorce, like, there's two tracks of communication. There's your everyday track, like how we're talking to one another right now. And then there's your your conflict track. And that's how you deal with a problem when a problem comes. And so in a really unhealthy marriage, what happens is the conflict track, which I call the quicksand,
Mm.
takes over your communication track. And so you're always on your conflict track, meaning things aren't solved and people can see like the smallest things and it sets you off and you're back to conflict. Just you're always back in your conflict mode because you've got so much resentment and so much of yesterdays that aren't resolved that are still bothering you, that you're constantly in conflict track, just constantly. And you,
Mhm.
even when you get up to communication track, like the smallest little thing will set you off back into your conflict track. And that's
Right.
for people that haven't swept up yesterday. And so yesterday's problems are big today. But then on the healthiest people, like, they solve their problems, and then you kind of get into future solving, which is developing systems. Like, me and my husband have problems that come up again and again and again, like about time or about how we discipline our children. And we sit down and we make a system and we solve it, not when we're in the moment, but at another time. We develop a system.
Mhm.
And so the really healthy people, their everyday communication track takes over their conflict track.
Right.
So instead of moving to fight and flight, they go right down to fair. It's like, hey, let's just talk about this like I talk to anybody in my normal communication track. I'm not going to get heated. I'm not going to get upset. I'm just in my fair mode. Like, can we just talk it through? And so when you get that mature ability to really fight fair, to fight like you, which is are in normal communication track, like, it transforms your marriage. And so when my kids have been dating people where they have an underdeveloped conflict tract, in other words, in their family, they were just fight or flight, and they have major problems with their mom or sister or someone, like major, major disagreements that still aren't resolved. So they're bringing all that past baggage into today. For the most part, from my perspective, that's not going to be a great fit. Why? Because that person's not whole. So, but let's just say that person goes to therapy and gets the treatment they need so that all their family of origin stuff is settled and that they know how to talk things out.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, I'm not saying that people can't have problems, but if they haven't cured and done the work to be whole from what's happened to them all the way prior to today, like, let's get that work done prior to moving into a marriage where you're involving another person inside of that space.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love how many processes and acronyms and methods that you have because I feel like so many people are kind of just guessing in the conflict space or even just in the relationship space, and they gravitate to what feels good for them, which may not feel the same way to their partner. They bring up all that
Right.
stuff, and like this engineering, this like system thinking around relationships is so important because it can just help you skip over so much stress and so much conflict. I love that.
Yeah. And it's just really so simple because we do it in other spaces. So we might as
Yeah.
well do it also in our marriage space.
Why do you think it's normalized in even like friendships, work? Why isn't it normalized quite yet in the relationship space?
It makes no sense because it's your heart space. Like, it's the person that you love the most.
Yeah.
And so it's completely illogical. And I think, and that's why my tag is mindful marriage. I think it just has to do from a lack of mindfulness for the
Mm,
most part, because you get so comfortable when you're in your jammies,
yeah,
and you're in your jammies with only pretty much your spouse.
so true.
So, and one other thing that I really, really stress when you're talking about systems is it's called the bullseye technique. And so what happens is a lot of people in their marriage make a lot of effort. So I get people in divorce saying, I made so much effort in my marriage. And like truly they did. So why are they divorcing? Well, it's like they missed the mark. They made effort on things. So I'll give you an example. One couple I was helping, like his dad would do woodworking for his mom, and she loved it. It was like her 1,000-point bullseye.
Mhm.
And so he would spend hours and hours woodworking for his wife. And she did not appreciate it, did not care for it. It was like a 200 out of 0 to 1,000 for her. And so bottom line is sometimes like you have marriage means something to you because of what your parents did or what someone else said or what you would like, you know? And so you try to then do something for your spouse, which has significant meaning to you, but not a lot of meaning to them. So I've developed the bullseye system where I tell people, and I have this sheet of 100 different items. And in the books that I have the 365 questions book. And in the back, there's all of these things that you can mark to see, and in my romance journal too, like, hey, how are these things going for you? Like, what's it worth? And I tell people, like, me and my husband have this working dialogue, and literally, we have a 10 out of 10 marriage. Like, we've achieved it and we stay there. And why? Because our marital formula is developed. Like, I know what his 1,000-point items are, and I focus most of my time on those 1,000-point items.
Right.
And he knows what mine are. And so also 800s, 900s, 1,000, and then we get these synergy spaces where, like, for example, we bought a hot tub at our house, and we both love hot tubbing. I love it because he's trapped to talk to me for, like, 25 minutes, and he loves hot tubbing. So, like, it's like this amazing synergy space that we have.
Mhm.
And so and there's other things we do, snorkel holding hands, and there's this long list of things that are synergy spaces, meaning they're worth more than 800 points to both of us. And you know what? We spend most of our time in that space. And the things that are 100s and 200s and 300s and 400s, of course, sometimes you do them. But sometimes I'll say to him, like the other day, he called and he wanted me to go to breakfast with some people, but I had a big deadline coming up. And I just said to him, okay, listen, how important is this to you on the scale from 0 to 10? And he's like, it's about a 4. And I said, well, listen, if it's a 4, I'm not going to go because this deadline is such a big deal. I've got so many things. I had a book deadline.
Right.
I'm like, I have so many things I've got to get done. I'm like, but if it changes and it becomes an 8 for some reason, you get there and it's like, you need me to come, like, I will 100% show up. But it's like we have this way to communicate and systemize things
Mhm.
so that because it shouldn't it for that situation when I had a lot of things on my ledger, it shouldn't have just been, well, I have to show up no matter what. It's like we had a way to communicate it. And if he would have said, you know what, this is a really big deal to me. I really need you to show up. 100%, I would have gone,
Yeah.
but I didn't go. And it was saying back to me that he supports me as well. And so you just get these little methods, and me and Jake have this list, and we do marital retreats once a quarter. And these retreats are so beautiful and so fun. And I have this little journal called All Things Marriage. And if you read it, it would tell you everything about our marriage that just makes it amazing and great. And we problem solve, and we have activities together, and we plan our quarter and plan our year, and we do goals together, and we self-actualize together, and we dream together. And, marriage can literally be the most amazing space of life. But like anything, you have to put your hours in. You have to put your work in. You got to do the work that says, hey, this is important. And I married Jake, so I'm not gonna figure out what my dad wants or my brother or my best friend's husband. Like, my decoding is I'm gonna figure out what could make Jake's life the best, and I'm gonna spend the time and effort to do it. Just like I play the piano and I've spent my 10,000 hours playing the piano and practicing my fingers off and writing music and performing and doing all of those things, you know, and you've gotta put that same effort into your favorite hobby, into your spouse to make marriage great. And one of my friends told me, "Look, my marriage is a 6, and I'm not cleaning out my closet, Tamara, because when you clean out your closet, it gets messy before it gets clean.
Mhm.
And so to move into a space where you're at 10 out of 10 means you've solved all past problems. And you also have systems for future problems. So it takes a lot of work and there's a little bit of heartbreak that occurs. And I remember when Jake and I were doing it, I was like crying my eyes out. Like
Mhm.
on our retreat, we do 10 too. 10 things we love about our spouse from the quarter. And I take avid notes. I have a love journal. I take pictures of what we're doing. I do entries. I share those with him in the quarterly retreat. And then 2 things that he wants me to work on for the quarter. So we always have 2 things that we're working on in our marriage. He gives me 2, I give him 2. When we first started it, I just had a hard time getting feedback.
Mhm.
And I just did, and I was like, this is so hard," but it made our marriage so great to know there's something that I can be working on, and right now I'm working on 2 things and so is he, and sometimes those stay on the ledger for a year until we master it, but sometimes we change it up. Sometimes they're joint goals about finances or savings. Sometimes they're little things like homework lab with my kids, like, even just little things,
Right.
and so but we're talking about it, and it's like, I ask someone, "What are your 1,000-point items?" "I don't know." "Okay, well, if you don't know, how would your spouse know?"
Right.
Like, part of it is just self-discovery, like, man, you go home today and you tell your spouse your 1,000 items, and if it changes because emotion-based people like myself, like, "Oh, sorry, I don't like that anymore." Like, you gotta communicate it, you
Yeah.
know? And so even giving my husband a list of favorites, like, "Hey, here's all my favorites, and as those change, I'm gonna update them." Like, all of those things, it just makes marriage amazing.
Yeah. The 1,000-point items, that kinda reminds me of love languages, like how you like to be loved. Is it kind of similar to that?
It is similar, but it's more on a micro level
Okay.
because it's not just like and I have a whole thing about love styles. Of course, I've got But but just generally, it's not like, "Hey, physical touch is my style." It's not like appreciation's my style. It's like for me and Jake, it's like, "Listen, we have, a marriage football, and it's just a journal that goes back and forth from each other's nightstands, and we just write love letters to each other." That is 1,000 points.
That's so
But
sweet.
when you say to someone, "Hey, appreciation is my 1,000 points," it's it's not it's not specific enough. It's not micro enough to be making a big difference in your marriage. Presence is
Right.
my 1,000 points. Well, what does that mean? It's so 1,000 points is a micro level of that.
Got it.
It's like, "Yeah, babe, like Jake knows I love surprises. Do a surprise once a quarter. Let's do a big getaway once a year." Like all of these systemized things too, and your 1,000-point systemized things are part of your marriage already. So when my son got in a horrible accident and he was hospitalized and we were grieving and it was so difficult, like we already had things systemized in our marriage where we went on a date, like even just a week later because we had already bought our tickets. And it helped us out of our grief space too. So these things are systemized in that cruise control of awesome marriage. And they're planned in advance. And we're constantly talking and we're constantly trying to improve.
I love that. I love the idea of retreats where you kind of get away every so often
Yeah.
and really, really take a look, really deep dive into things with each other. That sounds like such a good idea, and I don't know if a lot of people do that.
Yeah. I just try to tell people like the ideal retreat is at least 48 hours.
Mhm.
So you can have a full 24 hours in a hotel space without having to check out at 11 a.m.
Mhm.
So that's like ideal. Me and Jake do one honeymoon a year. So we do a 5 or 7 day once a year. And then we do these small little 24-hour retreats. And we just make it so simple. We do it on my birthday, his birthday, our anniversary, and one other time. So we do it on ways we'd
Oh,
already be
I love
celebrating.
that.
And we plan fun activities, we have appreciation, we have good sexual intimacy, and we then take 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours working through the workbook, which, I have in my romance journal. Someone's like, "Can you write it down for me?" I'm like, "Of course, like, I'll write down the system for you." So, we've written it out for other people, and we just go through the workbook every time and talk about our big crazy goals, talk about things that are going well, where we need help, but, like, we're always doing it, and it actually was my husband's idea, not mine.
Mm.
He came home one day after going to a work training because he was a CEO of a company, and they talked about these quarterly trainings, and he's like, "Babe, we should do a quarterly training in our marriage." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, we should." And so we kind of took that business model of quarterly training and transformed that into a marriage space. And it's been really, really beautiful. And it really makes all the difference to just have a space, a sacred space a little bit where just the two of you without interruptions. And we don't do a lot of answering of our cell phones during that period. And we're just taking a really fresh, clean break and just like enjoying one another and enjoying an activity together and connection, all the intimacy, physical, intellectual, emotional, sexual, all of the intimacy is part of these great retreats that like literally that's another one of my good to great tips for people's marriages.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And I think if people, obviously people who believe in marriage, choose marriage, it is the most important relationship you will ever have in your life. And so to prioritize it and give it that care and give it that attention it needs in order to withstand 60, 70 years of life in those close quarters, living together, going through all the highs and lows, children, grief, wins and losses. You need to take care of it that way. And so, yeah, I just appreciate so much all the effort and ideas you've shared of how we can improve our marriages, systematize our marriages, and how to kind of keep both partners really aligned with one another through all the change of life. Um, as we wrap up here, I would say my last two questions. So, second to last, if someone could take away anything from your page, your message, our conversation, what would you want that to be?
I would say that my number one message is be an ambassador for good marriages and fight for your marriage. It's worth the fight. Encouraging people to have that commitment space that maybe like in hundreds of years ago they really had in marriage, but just try to do everything possible to make your marriage worth like it is literally worth the fight. It is worth trying everything. And once you guys reach your own marital formula, which I love bringing people through, um, and you get there, you get to your 10 out of 10, and sometimes you dip back down and you communicate it, but like then, like, teach other people, be that ambassador because people come to you with their conflict stories, their marriage stories. I think that we hear so much negative marriage space because divorce gets exploded. We don't hear as much like, wow, my marriage is amazing. And let me tell you why, because you don't want to be bragful. You don't want to be boastful. But I think that we should take an opportunity to share more. And me and my husband take an opportunity. We have certain people in our lives that have the best marriages like ours. And we do getaways with them. We connect with them on dates. And while we're on those dates, we're like, okay, teach us another marriage tip from what's working great in your marriage.
I love
So
that.
surround yourselves with people which are modeling the marriage which you want. And I tell people, because some people came to a seminar of mine and both their parents were divorced. They're like, we have no model for marriage. I'm like, follow my mindful marriage. Like at least Jake and I, like we've got our acts together. We've done our 10,000 hours of work of our baseline. We don't have any in the thing in the past that's bothering us. We do our retreats. Like at least use us as a guideline. You know, if you don't have another person that you can think of, then there's people out there on social media that you can follow and kind of move through. So kind of be that ambassador for people once you guys get your act together and share the good word about good marriage practices.
Yeah, I love that. Where can people find you? All your amazing tips, your resources, where can they get connected?
So the best way to connect with me is on my Mindful Marriage Instagram. It's at mindful_marriage. And we post there often, and we do a lot of marriage posts and tips. We also run a program in Dominican Republic where we help people get married there. And
Wow.
so sometimes we're running like some of the marriages that people are sponsoring. So you can help sponsor a marriage. And soon, my husband and I are going to be doing a live course for people where we're going to bring them through marital formula. And so there's things that, we love to offer if people are interested in that. And then, we've got the books as well on Amazon. All of my books are on Amazon. I have a lot of books. So I've written, more than 20 books, but
Wow.
the marriage ones are in there. I have 3 marriage books and I've got another one coming out this year, which I'm really excited about.
Ooh. Okay, wait, before we go, can you tell us a little bit about your new book?
Yeah. So, my new book is about mindful marriage, and it brings people through the mercies, which is a qualitative study that I did with people about what makes their marriage great.
Mm.
And it brings them through all of the steps and again, systemizes things. 'Cause I'm a very systematic person about some things that can help marriage just have that strong foundation so that it can survive. And then in the back, it has of each chapter, it has date ideas and then in the very back, it has like those 1,000-point ideas where you can rate them from 0 to 1,000 to see if we can help you guys find some bullseyes to go and make your marriage dreams come true.
Oh, I love that. When's it set to come out?
It's gonna be coming out this fall.
Amazing. Well, congratulations. I cannot wait to pick up a copy. Dr. Tamara Fackrell, thank you so much for being with us today. You've been amazing.
Thank you so much for having me. And I want to end with this little quote that I pulled. Marriage is hard and divorce is hard. Choose your hard. Being financially disciplined is hard. Being in debt is hard. Choose your hard. Communicating is hard. Not communicating is hard. Choose your hard. So I just wanted to tell and be real about the fact that marriage is hard work, but it's something that's really worth it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's solo moment. I hope you all enjoyed the episode with Tamara. She is amazing, and I feel like I have to re listen to that episode a couple of times with a notebook and just jot down all of the amazing pieces of wisdom she shared and strategies. I think I love this episode because she just has such a unique perspective of seeing kind of the downsides and the bad sides of marriage and marriage ending and getting into a place where it's not working out. But I think there's so many amazing things that you can do. And I wanted to talk about this idea of really architecting your relationship or trying to quote unquote hack it and kind of put some systems in place to make it better. And people kind of look at that as oh, you're making your relationship like corporate and business and like you're taking the zaza out of it. And I don't think that's the case at all. I think so many people have just gone into this massive, hugely important, life altering thing, winging it. That's what we're doing. We're basically winging it and we're going in blind and going off of advice maybe we've seen or heard or just making it up along the way, which I think so many people, depending on who you are, you can be really successful doing that. But if there are research backed, tried and true practices that you can do, I think it's silly to ignore that and not prioritize making that a part of the conversation and a part of what you do in your marriage or your relationship if you know it's going to be beneficial, if it's been proven to work and improve the way you communicate, the way you fight, all of those things. And so I kind of just wanted to validate anyone who is putting systems in place in their relationship and putting calendar holds or putting meetings or doing a quarterly retreat because you are future proofing your relationship in a really helpful way. And I know it's not, a miracle worker. I think there's plenty of people who will try that and maybe it still won't work, but at least you tried. And I'm just hoping people hear this and feel less icky about kind of process and process in places where it hasn't historically existed. But you're only seeing things improve when process is put in place. It's like if you make your relationship like your business, that's process. If you make your household run like a business, that's process around scheduling, who does what, where the kids are going, XYZ. There's process there. And even things as silly or as minor as like your nighttime routine, your skincare routine, that's a whole system, that's a whole process you put in place to make sure that you're coming away with a beautiful face at the end of the day. So this idea that it's wrong to do that where it hasn't been, I disagree. And I just hope this conversation, with all of its tools, with all of its resources, has opened people up maybe to the idea of trying even just one thing. Say it's the going away one weekend locally each quarter, just to have alone time and prioritize time away. I think that's so special and yeah, just so rewarding. I think I'm someone who's also personally, very fearful of divorce. I think I have a lot of those values kind of implemented in me and like belief systems around marriage and the commitment you make and it being lifelong and wanting it to be lifelong. And I feel like millennials and more recent generations, don't look at couples therapy or don't look at self-help with the same negative lens as maybe it was thought about from older generations. It was kind of stigmatized that, oh, you have something wrong with you if you need a self-help book. You have something wrong with you if you're trying to work on something. And that's just like not the case for us. And so if you continue to go down that line of you're working on yourself, you're working on your marriage, you're working on your partnerships, you're working on your parenting, all of that is to enhance and elevate and make you better. And I just think we should celebrate people who are trying to break cycles, break patterns, break out of behaviors and practices that have traditionally held them back or hold people back who never did anything about it. So, anyways, I just think it was really great, really helpful. We're definitely going to implement the quarterly retreat plan into our relationship. That's something we don't do, and I love the idea of that. And just making it a bit more systematized. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Thank you so much for listening. Let me know if you enjoyed the episode. Send me a DM. Share with a friend if you did. See you next week.